social media channels are really reinforcing that. These get more clicks if you have this perfect body and the perfect yoga body, and so we're giving these mixed messages of eat, but also you have to have the perfect body. So it causes a lot of conflict within us. Hello, welcome to another episode of Soul Sessions with Creative Mind. I'm Deborah Burnt Maldonado. I'm here with Dr. Rob Maldonado.
Nice to be here.
We are continuing our series on mind-body, the mind-body. And before we begin, I want to remind you all to subscribe to our podcast. If you're listening to iTunes, Spotify, and other podcast hosting services, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any episode. If you're on YouTube, there's a little button here in the corner you can click and subscribe to our channel and get even some bonus videos and meditations that we post here every week. But today we are talking about the 3 reasons why the body hangs on to weight. So we're going to talk about weight management, weight loss, dieting, and the mind-body connection. So what are the 3, Rob?
Oh, yeah, let's dive in, right?
Yeah.
Genetics, an important factor, of course. Conditioning, which we'll talk about, culture and experience. And then the emotions and how we think about food and what kind of relationship we have with food.
And I'm an expert, basically, from this, not only because I've had my own weight challenges as early in life and body image stuff, but when I was a hypnotherapist, one of the main things that hypnotherapists, the big attraction is weight loss. And I've personally worked one-on-one with thousands of people on weight loss. And one of the things I noticed is it's not about dieting. It's not about changing, going to the gym more often, calories in, calories out. There's something else going on. And the first question I ask them is, what age did you first notice that you started gaining weight, or that you started thinking that your body wasn't good enough? And that where you started this kind of idea, I have to diet. And every person has, unless you don't really deal with weight and it's never been an issue for you, but if you struggled with weight, there's that moment. So think about that. If you're listening to this, when you're listening, think about, when was that time when I first looked in the mirror and said, ooh, or looked at the scale, or someone made a comment about your body, and boom, it starts some emotional connection. So we're going to get into that today. But let's start off with the genetics. We all say, ooh, my genes.
Right.
It's the genes.
Blame it on the genes.
Blame it on the genes. But why are genetics a powerful component of our weight management?
Yeah, so in psychology, there's been a long-standing debate. It's called the nature-nurture debate, meaning is it genetics or is it the environment that we grow up in? Let's say the latest consensus, it's that it's about 50-50. Half of our weight comes from our genetics and half from our cultural and environmental conditioning.
So it's like a roll of the dice in a way?
Very much so.
Is that why like some siblings would not have an issue with weight and some do? Because it's that kind of cross genetic dice game? Something
like that, yeah. We don't get to choose our genetics, meaning we don't get to choose our parents. But we do the best with what we have, right? And because the other 50% is our environment and our conditioning, certainly as adults, we can set up our own environments to where they benefit us. Yeah, so we in other podcasts, we talk about genetics and epigenetics, so we wanted to focus more on the conditioning aspect of it. We know the story begins with Pavlov and with food, because he was looking at how dogs get conditioned around food, right? The old salivation experiment. he understood or he discovered essentially that the environment, the things that are happening at the moment that the food is presented, leave a powerful imprint on the dog's mind. So that if you ring a bell right before you're going to give the dog the food, the dog learns that that bell signals the coming of food and begins to salivate even before the food arrives.
So the body starts being triggered by that preparing to eating just by the sound.
That's right. So you'll notice whenever you try to skip a meal or you have to skip a meal, around the time you're used to eating,
you look at the clock.
Yeah, you'll start to get hungry. The body is conditioned to receive food at those times, and that's why travel is so disruptive as well, because you're stepping outside that pattern.
I know, especially when we international travel and it's like 3 o'clock in the morning or 2 o'clock in the morning for us U.S. time, and we arrive and they're serving breakfast, and you're just like, I'm not really hungry for breakfast because we're off track there, and so we have that, but also we're conditioned around like just family, and we. Like I think food, from what my experience too, working with a lot of people on weight, is there's a celebratory aspect of food, and so there's this environment of when the family gets together, it's time to eat, and there's a good feeling around it, and so we start to condition ourselves at dinner time. That's when we all get together, unless you had not a good dinner time, that it could be. You could have an adverse reaction to food, but most of the time there's a celebratory, connective group connection that you get around food.
Yeah, it's certainly a bonding experience for most of us. Bonding with the family members, bonding with your mates, your friends, all those experiences are conditioning elements that your mind, body holds on to, and rightly so. But now if you think about the negative aspects of that, that if you're conditioned around the family to eat unhealthy foods,
yes, I was going to say,
now you're going to associate fried chicken or greasy, fatty,
ice
or
cream,
sugary foods with that feel-good emotion of bonding.
Well, I remember as kids, if you finished all your meal, you get a dessert. You get to have dessert. And if you don't finish your meal, you don't get dessert. So everything is about the feeding. And, actually, there's been some research with breastfeeding that if a woman, when a baby's breastfed, it's conditioned to eat only when it's hungry. When it's bottle fed, it's fed to
at a certain time.
Yeah, at a certain time, and then you always get the same amount. So the mother's like, finish the bottle, and so there is a big difference too. Like early in life, that conditioning, so powerful. Also, the media. Think about how the media, not only our family conditions around food, but the media, like how glamorous food can be on commercials and in magazines and. Just billboards as you're driving down the road and you're taking a road trip. There's that beautiful sign of a juicy burger there.
Yeah, back in the 30s, there was a famous psychologist named, it wasn't Skinner, it was Watson, earlier than Skinner. So Watson, after he finished his his training in university, he went to work for Madison Avenue, the Mad Men, right? The advertising companies. And he really pioneered this idea of, well, let's use behavioral principles to advertise.
So certain colors make people hungry. And then if you go past a restaurant, you smell the food. If you ever notice that, they pipe the food out on purpose. When you go to these,
smell.
Yeah, the smell. It's not the food. Yeah, you're right. The smell of the food. So when you go by, you're like, And even that guy who did he ate McDonald's for 60 days or something. He said like everything that they do is psychologically making you crave that food still.
Oh, the supersize me.
Supersize me, yeah. So we have that. But also on the other side of that, as a woman, I have to say that, well, I'm sure men have it too, but I think women have, have it worse with this idealized body that the media wants you to eat, but then it tells you, but you have to be super thin, stick thin, like a model, where you look almost like unhealthy, but that's the ideal body. And really, I think too, in Instagram and a lot of these social media channels are really reinforcing that. You get more clicks if you have this perfect body and the perfect yoga body, and so we're giving these mixed messages of eat, but also you have to have the perfect body. So it causes a lot of conflict within us. This kind of desires, like it's conditioned us to desire this body, that our body with its curves isn't enough, is wrong, and we need to like look a certain way. And then also, but you have to enjoy food because you can't not have food. And so that's also a way we're conditioned. We're conditioned to feel guilty for being overweight, but also conditioned to eat. And so it sets us up for failure.
Yeah, so now if you think about children, and most of us grew up with television and the media, of course, now the internet, but it's not a big deal when you think about adults. Okay, we can manage our consumption and our
sometimes
behavior. Yeah, but as children now, we're conditioning them to crave sugar and to crave unhealthy foods. At the same time, like you say, giving them that message that you should have the perfect body. So it's setting up people to have this internal conflict with food. So it's not a great mystery that all these eating disorders are popping up in the so-called westernized world, because it's an internal conflict that we're setting people up for, to want food and crave food that is not healthy for them, not good for them at all levels. At the same time, to have these perfect bodies that are idealized and unattainable.
And so we have this conditioning. We're getting, so we can't just say, you know what, I decided I'm not going to listen to the media anymore. I'm going to love my body, and I'm not going to listen to that commercial. And so we can't consciously just recondition ourselves. We could try. But it's not on a conscious level. So what we need to do is go deeper, and that's the emotion and the unconscious.
Yeah, because if most of us have tried to change behavior patterns, right? Diet or going to the gym, or changing something about our lifestyle, and we know it's very difficult. Why is it so difficult? Because conditioning is occurring at the unconscious level. If you think about emotion, that's where it's at. It's much older parts of the brain, much deeper than our cognition, our ability to think through things. It's unconscious in the sense that if we look inside our mind, we don't see it. We see our thoughts, or we hear our thoughts and that little voice and stuff, but we don't really get to the core of the conditioning, which is an emotional assumption about who we are and what the nature of the world is.
And also what food is associated with. So, or dieting, or being a certain shape. So when I was doing hypnotherapy on weight loss, I saw most of and this is men and women, there's a lot of emotion around starving and not eating. And like many of my clients would say, I go out to dinner and everyone's getting dessert and I don't get dessert, and I'm being punished, right? There's this kind of emotion around, like, I've been a bad person and I can't have this. There's also what very, very common is the relationship with men for women, is that they don't have, when they started to develop in puberty, they got the wrong attention from family members. It could even go into abuse. or even just attention or comments around their body, that they were getting too much attention. It didn't feel safe. So that when they gained the weight, there was some kind of feeling of safety. And many women that are overweight, I don't know if men have the same thing, but the women I've worked with, they had this idea that they're kind of invisible. And when they started to lose weight, we would work together and they would start to lose weight. They would start getting comments and they'd fall off. The resistance would hit in. I'm like, that's it. You don't want to be seen. And so it's beyond just dieting. It's this, what is your emotional trigger? What is that emotional drive to keep you in this pattern? It's a protective mechanism. It doesn't mean something's broken within you. It's that your mind said, let's do this so we can keep this because this makes you feel good. And emotional conditioning, as we know, is moving you away from pain to pleasure.
That's right. And so to get at the emotions and to get at the unconscious mind requires a little bit deeper work than simply trying to shift your thoughts from negative to positive. It requires really understanding what an emotion is, understanding that emotions are neither negative nor positive. They're simply designed to tell us what the meaning of things are.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah. And they imprint on us unconsciously because we feel every moment of our lives, we're feeling something. But most of the time, we're not thinking about what we're feeling. We're simply saying, well, that's just the way things are, right? We're just experiencing life.
And so you're saying that it teaches us what things mean, but it's really not, in essence, what things mean. It's just what we've been conditioned to think what things mean.
Right. Again, if you go back to those associations, so if I grew up in a family where it was a happy time to sit and have a great meal and bond with each other and have a great time, those are imprinted in my mind body. And that's how I relate to food in some respects. But most of us didn't have that, purely that experience. It was a mixture of things. And also that if those kinds of foods that imprinted on me were not the best for me or are not the best for me now, perhaps.
Like that craving, like I feel like I have ice cream or I feel like I want chips or whatever that is that you crave. Yeah. There's something associated with that emotionally.
Well, it's like you said, right? If mom was giving me milk and cookies to soothe me, now I associate sugar and sweetness with that soothing and that loving attention, which is not really the healthiest for me. Yeah. But I might use sugar now as a soothing mechanism.
You know, a lot of times the women I've worked with and men, they would have like a kind of a troubled household, like there was fighting or the parents were strict or critical. And then they'd go to the grandparent. And guess what? The grandparent is always like throwing the rules away. Here's cookies, here's the treats. When I'd go to my Nana's, she would give us Dr. Peppers or Cokes in the bottles. Remember those? And the pinwheels and the sugar, and that's what we ate. And so we were always associated with the treat and that kind of feeling of unconditional love that a grandparent mostly has than the parent who's the disciplinarian. So we start to crave that sense of emotion, like that emotional connection, that love, and food becomes love, food becomes acceptance, food becomes bliss. And then why would we want to rob ourselves of that emotionally? Yes. When we go on a diet, then we feel like we're being punished again. And it's not even conscious.
Yeah, and there's another factor is that food is not as good as it used to be. So food was healthier in the past, and now most of it is processed. And so when we're eating, perhaps it looks the same, perhaps, but it's not the same quality, then we get into trouble as well.
And so when we so we're craving this love, we're craving this connection, we're craving feeling good. And we get these mixed signals with food is delicious, but look thin, and we're mixed up with that. No wonder 2/3 of the U.S. is overweight. I mean, it's a problem, and I think globally, on the Western world, we people have these issues. I think in the U.S. it's the worst, and certain parts of the U.S. are even terrible. You could see cultural cultural issues. Like the joke of LA is everyone's like super thin, but no one eats. And then in the South, there's like, you can eat and you can be round and it's okay. And so there's all this stuff happening. But what are we really, how can we change? Like, besides working on the emotion, there's something even deeper, and that's the spiritual solution. And I feel like most of the reason why we are unhappy in life is a spiritual hunger. We're not really wanting the sweets, we're wanting something deeper.
Yeah, it's certainly one of the elements that the research borns out. But first of all, let's say we want to address this situation. The first thing to look at is the genetics. You don't necessarily have to understand all your genetics, but if you look at where your family comes from, your ancestry perhaps, then you start to get some ideas of what were the traditional foods that your particular group ate, and what was their environment like. And often those foods can be very beneficial for you because you inherited those genes, and you kind of grew up with that tradition, and your body is designed to feed off those foods. So it's a good idea to look at your genetics and to think about what those cultures ate and what their lifestyle was about. Then you look at your conditioning, your family, the way the traditions in the family, what was going on around the meal time, around
was
the
there
dinner
even
table.
enough food for everyone too? Right?
Yeah, those are also important aspects, of course. If there was hunger or lack or just poor eating habits, you can be pretty sure your mind took note of it somehow. It's not necessarily that you picked up those habits and that you're acting them out now, but that they're still in your unconscious and you're still reacting to them somehow. All right.
But also the emotional root of like individually, what does food mean to me emotionally? What am I trying to, why does it bring me pleasure? And then some people actually have it reversed where they push food away almost like they hate food. They don't enjoy food because their pleasure is tied to a certain look of their body. So it can lead to disorders as well. So you can swing both sides where you actually are afraid of food.
Good point, yes. So, yeah, the whole nature-nurture piece, right, is you want to look at both sides, your genetics and then how you were conditioned around food, meaning what meaning are you ascribing to food? How are you using it? Are you using it for nourishment or for pleasure?
Or entertainment.
Or for entertainment,
Yeah.
for emotion, to fulfill unmet emotional needs? All those are, aspects of all our relationships to food, but what are your particular ones, and you want to start to pay attention to that. We know bringing awareness is one of the first principles.
Yes.
Right, but it's the right kind of awareness, because often people fall into that obsessiveness of, I got to watch what I eat and how much I weigh, and that's not a good approach because you're using your ego then against you. It becomes very self-critical and always putting you down for not meeting those goals that you're setting up for yourself.
Well, I can relate to that. Early in my when I was 16, I had I was a little curvy. I worked actually at Wendy's when I was 16.
Oh, no.
So I had those Frosties and French fries. And when I was younger, I could eat anything I wanted. But then when I, started going through puberty, I started to gain a little weight, and like 10 pounds, 15 pounds. And I had my tonsils out. and I lost all that extra weight. And when I lost that extra weight, I got super thin, and everyone started complimenting me like, wow, Debbie, you look so great. You're so beautiful now. And like, it's just this, the kind of like the culture again that rewards positive body, looking a certain way. So in my early 20s, I became obsessed with keeping that weight off. So I would weigh myself every time I ate. I became really obsessed. And if I gained a pound, I would just be so hard on myself. And it was just this miserable life. And I remember thinking one day, I'm going to have to live the rest of my life not able to enjoy food, because when I eat food, I have to feel guilty and then have to diet again. And it was like, when can I just eat what I want to eat? And like when can I be normal? And I'm sure many people can relate to that, where it's like constant obsession, right? When is this ride going to be over with? And what shifted for me is when I started working in the city and I started to find passion in something else. Like I just stopped thinking about food. That's when I started to get in my natural balance. So it, like, just dieting and weighing myself and starving myself was not going to do it. And so I started to kind of recalibrate my relationship with food as not being so dysfunctional, where I'm starving and then eating and making up for those times. So, but the last thing is that spiritual level. And I think that's kind of was my first step, is there's something beyond me just eating healthy and being a thin person. It was like there's some meaning in life. And that's where I started to look at purpose.
Yeah, that's right. Because if we're using food to as a substitute for a meaningful life, that's part of that unhealthy pattern that we get into. So having a purpose in life, having a deeper connection to your own awareness, your own mind, body, that's a big way, a great way to think about yourself, to relate to food, and to start making those bigger changes in your life in a creative, positive way.
So, in other words, that you're not just obsessed with the mind body, the thinking, conscious thinking, and the unconscious mind. There's this other element, a deeper part of ourselves that we're connecting with, that's basically larger than this little machine that we're trying to live life with.
That's right. And, if we think about fasting has been in the news recently, and a lot of people are practicing it, even intermittent fasting. It's very powerful, and every spiritual practice on the planet has had this practice of fasting. So if you ask why is food connected to your spiritual life? Because it is essentially the connection between mind and body, spirit and matter. It is the way we express our spirituality through food. Food has always been connected with life, abundance, sustenance, spiritual food, right? Or it's symbolic of our spiritual nourishment.
Well, a Catholic, you have the wafer, that you're eating, the breaking of the bread, the Last Supper. There's also the in Islam they have the fasting
and feasting.
Fasting and feasting.
So both fasting and feasting are religious and spiritual practices.
And so why fasting? It's because we're removing our external bodily desires, and we're kind of like almost like taking a step back and relying on God or the divine to sustain us. And so that's really like withdrawing the sense needs, the sense urges to fast. And the thing is, we don't want to diet for the sake of having the perfect body. We want to have a better, healthy relationship with the world and food and our own bodies.
Yeah, absolutely. So the spiritual aspects of fasting, it's kind of saying, I'm dropping my typical pattern of eating for a while and looking inward. So it's a purification of the mind body.
And the body, biologically, when you fast, there's all this research now what it does and how it balances out the body systems.
Yeah, it resets and recalibrates the metabolic system, so that you're going back to factory settings.
The default settings.
Yeah, which are, the body has its own wisdom, its own nature. So you're paying attention to it, and it's like you say, the research really shows that it's a great way to reset your metabolic pattern, and it doesn't require much. You don't necessarily have to fast for days and days. Intermittent fasting, just kind of dropping one meal,
not skipping breakfast, basically, right?
Skipping breakfast or dinner, and doing it for a few days out of the week can have beneficial effects on your mind body.
And I also think that beyond just fasting, because that's an easy thing to do, is we really have to go to who am I? What's my purpose? Ask ourselves the deeper questions of life, because our purpose isn't to have the perfect body or to lose the 10 pounds or to not or be healthier. I mean, that's part of it. Like, we do want to be healthier. We do want to avoid disease, and we know that being overweight does impact your body's health. But it's like, how do we go to the deeper reason why we're here? We're not doing it just so our body lives and is more comfortable for the remainder of our life. We want to do it because there's some deeper knowledge that we need to attain about ourselves and about why we're here.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, we're just rearranging the furniture, and I'm going to fast now because it's spiritual, and I'm going to go on this like workout program and this diet and do, these things, but it's not really addressing that deep spiritual connection. And I think once you have that, once you satiate your spiritual hunger, you can, all the other stuff is easier to do. Have you noticed that too? Like when people start to find that the nourishment within, with spirit, that all their cravings for money, success, fame, having the ideal body, relationships start to shift. And it doesn't mean you don't have those things, but it doesn't define you like it used to.
Yes, so we can see at all levels, all from the biological to the spiritual, our relationship with food is so important. It impacts our human condition at all levels.
Yeah, so this is food for thought, no pun intended, for today. And we will continue this series on mind body next week, where we're going to talk about the power of sleep, which is also a big problem in our society. So many people suffer from insomnia, and what we can do, why do we have it, and how can we have better sleep and be happier, healthier human beings. So we'll see you next week, and hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.